Hello and welcome to the Enterprise Talk Conversation Series, a peer knowledge resource by the CXOs for the CXOs. Now to our host, Kanika Goswami.
Hi, we welcome you to a podcast on stage with enterprise thought leaders. My name is Kanika Goswami, and I'm the managing editor of On.media's B2B enterprise technology publications. We have engaging conversations with global thought leaders and industry experts, which reach 1.3 million business leaders worldwide. Today we have with us Alan Jacobson. He's a chief data and analytics officer of Alteryx. I'm told his areas of interest are data science, digital transformation, product development, international operations. Anything you'd like to add to that, Alan?
That's a mouthful of description.
I'm sure that's not enough. I'm sure there's a lot more about you that we don't know yet, but we'll find out. So, as a CDAO, Alan drives key data initiatives and accelerates digital transformations for Alteryx global customer base. His experience has made him uniquely placed in identifying and creating tools that drive better decisions from leveraging data and the insights into why data and the insights. So, Alan, is there anything that you want to tell us about what Alteryx does and the role you play as a CDAO in the company?
Yeah, so Alteryx is kind of a unique place to be a chief data and analytic officer because there are three very different roles that I get to participate in. One is internal data science, using our data to make Alteryx stronger, making decisions. And that probably looks a lot like data science at companies all over the world, with the nicety that we actually use our own product to do a lot of that work. Alteryx is a great data and analytic automation tool, so that's part of that piece. Because we're selling a piece of software that helps companies enable their employees to do this type of stuff, we have an additional role that many companies wouldn't have for a chief data and analytic officer, which is I go out and help organizations going on this journey. And that is a wonderful opportunity both to help companies, but also to learn what companies all over the world are doing. Alteryx is used by about half of the Global 2000. So we really get a pretty expansive view to best practices of how people are using data and analytics to further their company's mission. And the third role, because the product is a data science product, sometimes the data scientists are actually putting capability, features, and functions into the product itself. So three very different roles: internal data science, customer-facing data science, and creating product that has data science in it.
And all of them very interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Which is why the questions.
A lot of fun.
So,
a lot of fun.
My first question to you is, Alan, why do you think the diversity and variety of persons in the data engineering make the idea of a true source of data improbable?
So, I first want to back up and talk about what it looks like at a typical global enterprise operation. If you're, let's say, an automotive manufacturer, I worked at Ford Motor Company for many, many years, 25 years, very complex set of systems at the company. And if you take a very simple piece of data, like, what does the variable cost of a part like this cost, a widget that's going to go on the car? What's the variable cost of that part? You're going to get very different answers if you go into, let's say, the purchasing system, and you look at what we buy the parts for. You get a different cost if you're talking about a production part that goes on the production vehicle than maybe a service cost, because the service parts, you're buying very small volumes versus very large volumes, and you're buying them more sporadically. It might be different if you go into a finance system and maybe the part is going to a joint venture and there are transfer costs and VAT and other things. And are you including that or you're not including that? The manufacturing system might also include the piece cost of the part. And the interesting thing is that many large organizations, like an automotive company, if you ask the finance system, what system should you use, they would of course say the finance system is the system to use. But the purchasing department says, well, of course, if you want to know what a part costs, you have to talk to the people who buy the part. And the manufacturing system would say, no, the right system is the manufacturing system. We build everything. And those numbers are going to be different. Again, does it include shipping or tax, or does it include the warranty cost and the warranty reserve, the transfer costs, all these different things. And so you've got all these different systems, and they have what many people call different versions of the truth. I dislike that saying. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But at the end of the day, each system has, yes, some pieces of dirty data, but they're all truthful. They're all telling the truth. They're just different versions, because depending on why you're asking the question, you might need different variants of the answer. So a simple question that someone might ask, what's the piece cost of a part? What's the variable cost of a part? Could get very different answers depending on why it was asked. Now, I'll take that outside of a complex enterprise and ask a really simple question. How many countries do you think there are in the world? Sounds like a simple question. We should all know how many countries there are in the world. But if you ask different groups, if you ask the Olympic Committee, how many countries? The Olympics has countries compete. You would think they might know how many countries there are in the world. Their number is not the same as FIFA, the World Soccer Organization. They disagree of who they recognize as a country. And then if you go to the UN actually has more than one answer. They might say, well, do you want to know how many countries we, the UN, recognize? Or how many countries come to us and say that they are a country, which they may or may not agree with or not. If you go to ISO, the International Standards Organization, yet a different number of countries. And if you said, Kanika, your job is to get all these people to sit at a table, and you need to get them to all agree to how many countries there are in the world. No one's leaving until we all agree. I mean, I wouldn't want the job. That would be a terrible job to have. And yet that is what many organizations try to do when it comes to some of the data engineering and getting single version of the truth. Now, don't get me wrong. There are certainly some questions in the business where there can only be one answer. Box 4 of the tax form, there cannot be 27 versions of what goes in box 4. Like there's only one number that's going to go in box 4. And certainly you need a governance process that makes sure that the right people can approve and say, yep, that's the right number. That's what we're going to submit to the government in box 4 of the tax form. And so at a high level, this is some of what makes it challenging. Now I can tell you one more story if you'd like about this construct, single version of the truth. And I'm going to do this through a story. I want you to imagine you're in a meeting. An executive in the meeting asks a really simple question. How did sales change last week? And 3 people run out of the room and they each go to pull data, and they come back, of course, with 3 different answers. One says it went up 10%. Kanika, you said it went down 20%. Another person said it went down 30%. And the executive, of course, who asked the question is not very happy about this. They probably turn to their chief data and analytic officer, someone like me, and say, don't let this happen again. This can't happen. I asked a simple question. I just want one answer. If anyone tries to come in the room next week and has a different answer, hit them over the head, which that I would say is not a good way to build a culture of analytics. But that actually happens at companies, right? But if you think about what actually happened at most companies, the reason these 3 people came to different answers, I can pretty much tell you it's almost never because they don't know how to perform math. The problem isn't they can't add or subtract. And it certainly is not because they're 2 liars and 1 truth teller. That's what single version of the truth would imply. That one of these 3 people is the truth teller and 2 of them are liars. And I don't think companies have a lot of liars. And so I really dislike that phrase because it implies that our companies have a lot of liars in them. Now, why does it typically happen? Well, the first person who pulled the data said, I'm going to use the standard definition of a week. I'm going to go Monday through Sunday. I'm going to look at the total sales. And my answer is it went up 10%. The second person said, well, there was a big storm, a blizzard that hit last week, and it hit on a Wednesday. And I bet the executive is asking the question because they want to understand how sales changed before the storm to after the storm. So I'm going to pull the data Wednesday through Tuesday, because I think that that's probably the best way to answer the question. And the third person, he thought about it and said, well, they asked if sales went up or down. They didn't say whether they meant the quantity of the sales or the dollar basis of the sale. And I think they're looking at how many transactions we're doing. So I'm going to use quantity instead of dollars. And of course, I'm going to get a different answer again. Again, none of them mathematically incorrect. None of the answers wrong. The real problem, we'll ask you, Kanika, who do you think is the problem here? Is it the analyst, the data engineer? Like who's creating? Is it the CDAO? No, of course not.
No, the person who's asking the question, because you have to have specific context. That's
right. And to be fair, we haven't really trained executives. I will tell you, when I started my career 20 and 30 years ago, there's a movie that had this in it. It was called Office Space. I don't know if you watched the movie Office Space. A bit of a comedy. And I'd say if you want to be in the data engineering space, this is like
the
required.
Office is what we watched, not the Office.
Not the Office. Office Space. It's a movie versus a TV series, but similar in that it's a bit of a comedy that's about life in an office. So it's similar in that sense.
Yeah.
And in the movie, there was this single version of truth report. They called it the TPMS report. And the TPMS report came out every week. Or no, TPS report. That's right. It was called the TPS. I think at Ford, it was called the TPMS report. See, real enterprises had the same thing. It was called the TPS report. IT, each Friday, would pull data out of all of the key systems, wrangle it around, put out a binder with all the key metrics in the business. So if you were an executive and you had a question at a meeting, like what happened with sales last week, there were only two possible answers that could happen. Either everyone would agree, they would flip through the binder, they'd find the statistic, it would say 42%, and they'd say the answer is 42, and everybody would agree, which is really nice, right? Or the second answer, which again, everyone would agree with, was I don't know. Because nobody could actually get into systems and pull data. We didn't have tools like Alteryx that made it easy to do this. And so at the end of the day, there were only two possible answers, which I would say made life for an executive very easy. They could ask lots of questions and everyone would agree on the answer, and they didn't have to explain why. Now, I wouldn't say it was better then. The reality is that number that came back, 42 is the answer, wasn't necessarily the right answer for why you were asking the question. It might be very misleading. You might be thinking sales went up because it was pulling Monday through Sunday, and it really should have pulled Wednesday through Tuesday based on the context of why you were asking. But at the end of the day, you were none the wiser. You just asked a simple question, you got an answer, and you went on with your business. And so teaching our leaders how to ask better questions, how to explain the why that they're asking the question. And almost more importantly, when three people come with these three different answers, if you can do two things as a leader, be nice and be curious. Don't pull out a stick and start hitting people and claiming they're two liars in the room with a single version of truth talk. That's not going to help build this culture of analytics that you so desperately want. But maybe if you're curious, well, Kanika, you said it went up, but Alan, you said it went down. How did you pull the data? Oh, you did Monday through Sunday, and Alan, you did Wednesday through Tuesday. That actually explains exactly what's going on. That, oh, the blizzard really made a difference. We can see it in these two numbers. And the reality is most questions in the business don't need to be locked down with all these definitions the way that box 3 of the tax form does. Most questions in business need nimbleness to be able to quickly get answers that are pulled the right way. The last thing I'll share on this is that some people have tried to solve this with this construct of a dictionary. I'm just going to define everything. I'm going to define when someone says, did sales go up or down? I'm going to define what sales is. It's dollar based, and they asked for a week, and we're defining a week. A week is always Monday through Sunday, and we're going to define this, and we're going to define that. And the reality is when the questions come in, you're going to constantly find either you need a new definition. In my example, I don't want the week that goes Monday through Sunday. I need a new definition now. So what are we going to call that week? Oh, that's the Wednesday week. Pull me the Wednesday week of data, that, right? You're going to end up with 8 million definitions. No one's going to be able to figure out which one to use. And I would tell you, companies that actually have spent a lot of time building these massive dictionaries, do you think anybody actually reads a dictionary? When was the last time you read the dictionary? I mean, it's nobody reads the dictionary.
Years ago, probably. When you're in school, after that, nobody really goes back to that.
Right. And so it is very hard, even if you invest the time to write down all these definitions. And even if your question is sitting in the answer is sitting in one of these definitions, it's very hard to get somebody to read the 57 definitions of what variable cost of this pen is. I'd rather just go to an expert that knows something about these different systems who can guide me and tell me, well, you probably want to use this system for that type of a question. Here's why. You may run into these issues. You could supplement it with this other system. That's what really happens. And so what I find is that there are usually a small group of people at any company that know the systems, know the data really well. And you need those people talking to each other, and they become the guides for everyone else. So I gave you a very long answer to a very simple question. Why is it so hard for data engineers? And I would broaden that. I won't say data engineers. I would say, why is it so hard for the data docents, the guides? Sometimes the guides are data engineers, but sometimes the people who know the data best are actually sitting in the business. And so why is it hard for data docents, data guides, to help people navigate data? The hard part is that there are so many different ways to wrangle that data and cut the data based on the question that you're asking, which is wonderful because it means almost any question that you ask, data can probably help, but it also makes it very complicated.
So my next question is, I think, following from what you just said, how does relying on one data source drive users to find other solutions and hence may give rise to shadow IT?
Yes, I'll do this one maybe through another story again, and I can remember this one really vividly. A tax person saw this demo of Alteryx, and they said, "Wow, you can really do really neat things with this tool. I would love to get a copy of that. Can I learn Alteryx?" I said, "Sure. Here's a key. Go off and see what you can do." And I think it was like a Wednesday or Thursday. And Monday morning, I get a phone call from this tax person, and he says, "Hey, Alan, I've automated this VAT tax process. I want to put it up on the server. Can you help me put it up on the server?" I said, "That's amazing. Like, you got the tool on a Wednesday and you've done something with it and you're ready to automate a process. I love that. But we do have a governance process. So could you come in day after tomorrow and just show us what you did? We're going to clap for you. It's going to be great. And we'll put it up on the server." So I said, sure. So he comes in, and at this review, we had a very cross-functional team. Anybody in the company who wanted to come could come. So we have a privacy lawyer there. We have a data engineer there. Data scientists are in the room. And, I tried to coach everybody. When you come to the review, we're not all going to take out sticks and beat people about everything that they did wrong and show how we know more than they know. That's not the purpose of the meeting. The purpose of the meeting is we're all here to help each other to get great outcomes from our company. And so that seems obvious, but is actually, from a human nature standpoint, sometimes hard because everybody wants to show how much they know. So the tax person comes and he shows this beautiful workflow. And I said, "Well, what did you do? What's this first workflow?" And he goes, "Well, I automated the VAT tax collection process." I said, "Oh, you automated it. That sounds pretty cool. Does it save time or does it save money?" I assume time because you automated something. He says, "Well, it does save time, but I did it to save money." I said, "Well, how does automating something save money?" He says, "Well, when the VAT tax was below a certain amount, we didn't bother to collect the VAT tax because the cost to recover it manually was higher than the cost of recovery. But now that we've automated it, we're going to get 100% VAT tax recovery." So, that's really interesting. How much is that worth? I mean, it's just the small amounts, right? I said, "Yeah, it adds up to about $5 million a year." I said, "Okay, so you learned to use some data and analytics tools in Alteryx. Great. You automated a process, and over the weekend, you found $5 million. That's pretty exciting. Everyone should be clapping now. Let's clap. This is why we're in this business of data and analytics. This is really exciting." And so instantly, a data engineer raised their hand. And they say, "I see on the workflow you're grabbing data. Where did you grab the data from?" It says, gave the systems he grabbed it from. And the data engineer immediately said, "Wait, you didn't use the data lake? That's our single version of the truth. You didn't use the data lake?" And the tax person said, "No, I did not use the data lake." And the data engineer immediately, they kind of puffed out their chest and said, "Well, then I'm not going to let you publish that workflow." Now, I'm kind of devastated. We were just about to save $5 million. And now you're telling me, do not pass go, do not collect $5 million. This is terrible. And before I could say anything, the tax person said, "Oh, well, if you don't want to allow, or if you're going to make me use the data lake, I don't want to go to jail. So it looks like you're going to file the taxes. And he pushed all of his papers across the desk. He got up and said, good luck filing the taxes, Mr. Data Engineer. And don't think I'm going to visit you in jail. And he starts to walk out. And I'm like, oh God, I've just completely lost control of the meeting. So please come back. Please don't leave. Let's talk about why this happened. Said, look, Mr. Data Engineer, you clearly care passionately about the data lake. Yeah. And he goes, yeah. I said, and your job is to make the data lake something that everybody uses. Said, yep. And look, I want you to know, we want you here. Like, you're invited to the meeting for the next meeting. We love you. Your first question, did you use the data lake? I think was a totally fair question. But when the tax person said, I didn't use the data lake because I didn't want to go to jail, I think your job isn't to tell him he can or he can't. You're not the approver of that. You're not trying to lock everyone down to only using one source of data. That's not your job. Your job might be to say, oh, well, that's interesting that the data in the data lake isn't good for what you're trying to do. Could I meet with you offline and you can tell me why it's not good? Because my job's to make it good so that one day you can use it. Let's go talk about it. That's good governance, right? But if you force everyone to use that one source of data, you're probably not going to like what happens. In this case, your choices are go to jail or not file the taxes. Like, these are not good alternatives, right? And so in the end, the solution to governance isn't the I'm going to lock everything down approach. Now, again, it doesn't mean we don't have governance. I'm describing a governance process where I'm bringing everyone together. And the difference between a good conversation and a bad conversation is just a few tweaks of words of how these people work together. Now, the interesting thing, by the way, is that what I just described of who's approving things, and I even said this to the data engineer, I said, Mr. Data Engineer, if I came to you and I asked you to build the full automation to do this automation, you build it. In the IT rulebook, who gets to approve the thing you built before we file the taxes and send the taxes to the tax authority? Who's the approver? And at every company in the world, the approver is the tax expert, has to approve it. So what's really strange is when we came into this forum and a tax person is showing their automation, you suddenly thought you were the approver because we were talking about data and analytics, and you thought, well, I'm the data engineer, I get to approve. I said, look, I'll let you be the approver if you'll agree that when it's wrong, you'll go to jail, because that is the potential penalty to the tax person. But that's not the penalty for a typical data engineer. But if you'll accept that you're willing to go to jail, then I'll accept that you can be the approver. The tax person's like, I'm not sure I'm going to accept this. But of course, the data engineer immediately said, no, I don't need to approve anymore. I can just help. That's okay. But I think getting these roles right are just critically important. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Just one thing I wanted to understand here is we were talking about if there is if people are relying on one source of data, there would be uniformity, as you're saying that the engineer wanted him to take data only from the data lake and no other source. But he did. So would that give rise to some kind of shadow IT issues?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about shadow IT, and there have been historically some issues that we've put this title on, and we've called it shadow IT, and they were real issues. So I don't want to confuse people listening that there aren't some issues that can rise from this concept of what shadow engineering is about. But let's maybe define what is shadow engineering, because I think if we can define what shadow engineering is, then we can talk about, is this going to create a shadow engineering problem or not? So the first type of shadow engineering that existed in many organizations is, a department needed to do something with relative speed, whatever that was defined as, and IT couldn't deliver it for them, whether it cost too much or it wasn't fast enough for them to build it. So they ended up hiring frequently their own technical folks. So maybe within an accounting team, there's actually someone who can write Python or write some code, and they built an Access database back in the day. That would be a very normal shadow IT. So there were these two accountants that knew how to build an Access database in a sea of 300 accountants, and The people building that database weren't part of IT. They were part of the business. And that created a couple of problems. The first problem is if and when either of those two people left, there was no one else in accounting that knew anything that was going on in that system. And so who was going to maintain it? Who was going to fix it when there was an issue? And of course, IT knew nothing about the system, so that it's harder for them to help. And so the first problem is that. Now, if you're using tools that are very democratized, that it's like Excel, anybody can use it, that somewhat negates that problem, because you haven't built something in some technology that only 3 people know how to use, and nobody knows what to do with it. So that's certainly one problem. The second problem is related to best practices and governance. So if IT is building a database, they would have a list of best practices of what they do. But now that you have this separate organization outside of IT, they're actually sitting in accounting. Does the supervisor in accounting know anything about best practices to help make sure that when they build the solution, they're following best practices? And certainly, if you're going to democratize analytics and have lots of people doing analytics, you're going to need somebody to drive best practices of how you do these things. And that's a real issue. In some ways, the governance meeting that I was describing, where people came together and you would demonstrate your stuff, you'd put it on the screen, was a place that we could drive best practices into the process. So that's how one of the many things we would do to govern how that worked. And then the third problem that people use the moniker shadow IT is when people use technologies that aren't like the approved IT technology. So, I really want to share with you a file. Boy, the IT way of doing it, I got to sign all this paperwork. I've got a Dropbox folder. I know it's not corporate approved, but let's just share the file in the Dropbox folder. And unfortunately, then data leaks. We use something that isn't secure, right? We end up on a bad path. Well, if the tools that you use to democratize analytics are approved enterprise-grade tools, Alteryx, again, used by 50% of the Global 2000. It's an enterprise-grade tool. It's been around for 30 years. It has all of the security accoutrements that you would expect. So can you make that an approved piece of technology for an organization? Can you democratize it so a wide number of people use it? And can you have people rolling out best practices so it keeps you on the rails? Those 3 things, I think, are all shadow IT issues. Certainly, if you implement any technology and you don't do those things, you can have obviously a problem. But leading organizations know how to solve those 3 problems and can still democratize analytics and have many systems that people need to pull data out of to get answers to questions. So I don't think the need to grab data from separate places is the secret to eliminating the shadow IT problem. It actually has very little to do with it. I do think, by the way, creating a data lake is a great concept. So in that last story, we've got a data engineer trying to help people by building a data lake. And at Alteryx, we have a data lake. And I'd like to think that we're somewhere around 50 or 60% of all the data that someone might need to solve a problem, they can most likely get in the data lake. It's not 100%. We fully expect that they will need data from other places to answer questions. And if over time it goes from 50% to 60% to 70%, it just makes it easier for people to do the work that they're doing because they have a nice place where the data is organized and clean and ready for them. But we don't do that because we're trying to prevent them from getting to something else. We're doing it because we want to make it easier for people to get answers to questions with data.
So how do data engineers and business users work together to draw on diverse data and create a more integrated environment as far as usage of that data is concerned?
Yeah, I really like the question because I think the secret sauce to a lot of this stuff, and I said this at the beginning, is building this culture of analytics. How do you build communities of practice, people working with each other? I actually love, if I'll use a space that's in the kind of in the data dictionary realm. There are many companies that have data lineage and data dictionaries and data quality and these sorts of things, and they're trying to help a user figure out, where do I find the data that I need? And I think even if you look at how those tools have evolved, many of those tools now use social networking ways of helping people find where the right data is. So you upvote and downvote data sets, give them thumbs up or stars and down stars. You look at who used the data last oh, Kanika, you used this data set last. I might want to call you because you know something about this data to guide me and help me with what I'm trying to do, right? And so building a community of practice, getting business people and technology people to work together as a community to solve problems is always going to get companies further than, and this may again sound strange from a technology person, than a technological solution. I'm going to magically solve all the problems because I'm going to use this tool and this dictionary. And no, like people are actually going to have to talk to each other. People are going to need to share the knowledge that they have with each other to get to the best outcomes.
Right, and technology or IT in this case is an enabler for business. These are not two different silos that they work separately and then reach nowhere. So
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Sense. And my last question would be, how do you identify and create tools that lead to better data-driven decisions?
I didn't catch that. How do you
identify and create tools that lead to better data-led decisions?
Yeah. So again, in the end, look, Alteryx is a great data wrangling tool and automation tool. It's certainly used in this space. It's one of the leaders in the space of doing this type of work in a business. In that, I think companies need to find some tools on their tool belt that can be used both by highly technical people and by business people. If you think about it, the current tool set or the toolbox that most companies use have two types of tools. There's the tool that's really mainly used by the business. And I'd say there's only one tool that's pretty much, if I say, here's a big company, what tool do you think they use to analyze data in the business? The accountant, the marketer, the tax person, the engineer sitting at his desk. If he gets a bunch of data and needs to analyze it, the one and frequently only tool that every company is a spreadsheet. It's typically Excel. They have a spreadsheet. Some companies have at least one visualization tool, Power BI, Tableau, Click, some tool of that ilk that's easy enough for a business person to use. And I don't mean to just view things. I mean, they can actually create visualizations of the data. The third tool that's frequently in the toolkit is a tool that does automation and analytics and data wrangling. That's Alteryx. But if you look at the toolkit, you'll probably find 20, 30, 40 tools used by IT and only IT. Lots, Python, R, and lots of software that is used by IT to manipulate data and analyze data and do all sorts of things with data. And I only think they're like these three tools at most that business users have at a company on the business side. They have a spreadsheet, maybe a viz tool, and maybe an analytic automation tool at most in the toolbox. What I find is leading companies have a good set of tools, at least the minimum of those three, that everyone can use, that both technology people can use and the business, so they can work together, they can talk to each other. Because otherwise what happens is the technology side of the shop is off building in Python or some piece of software that's really only useful to technology people. And that really separates these two communities because their tools, it's like they're speaking two different languages. And so it's really hard for them to collaborate. And so I do think it is important to identify some small set of tools that are going to be kind of your unifying platform across your organization that everybody can use, everyone has access to, and we can share things with each other in that common language. Alteryx certainly plays that role at many companies. Again, we're in 50% of the global 2000, so certainly we act as that layer at a lot of companies. But I do see a lot of companies that don't have that the only of those three, they only have one of the three. They have a spreadsheet. And really the IT organization and the data scientists are off using very different technologies. And that can make it very difficult to get that collaboration.
I do get that. So those were the questions I had for you, but I'd request you to please stay on the line while the video is uploaded. Unless there's something else I've missed which you think is critical or needs to be mentioned, which would the audience may find interesting, you feel free to add. If not, my questions are done.
So thanks for having me, Kanika. It's great to be here today, and hopefully this gave a new
I learned so
perspective.
much. Oh, yes, I
Yeah,
learned
a
so
new
much.
perspective.
When we
So
usually have discussions with technology leaders, it is a very rare occasion that they illustrate their answer with a real life example, which is why I learned so much from you today. Really, thank you for that, Alan. It was a pleasure
Thank you.
talking to you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Please do follow us on social media for regular updates and new content.